Hello, everyone. A very good afternoon. We would like to welcome you all for our Ask the Expert event exclusively for the members of Payatu's WhatsApp community. The aim of this event is to equip you with the comprehensive and valuable insights into cybersecurity. My name is Aparna, and I will be the host for this event today. So before we dive in, let me take a few minutes to introduce Payatu. So Payato is a research-powered cybersecurity consulting firm with a decade-long focus exclusively on cybersecurity. Here is an overview of the various consulting assessments we are known for across the globe. We have delivered numerous cyber talks and workshops at prestigious security conferences that includes Black Hat and DEF CON. We take pride in our decade-long impact on the global cybersecurity community. For those curious about Payatu hirings, I would like to call upon Akanksha, our HR head, to share updates regarding the same. Akanksha?
Thank you, Aparna. Hello, team. Welcome to the webinar. Team, a couple of you keep on reach out to us, the hiring team on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. So just wanted to take you up through the open positions that we have and we are hiring for. So we are open for taking applications for security consultant red team role. Here we are looking out for an experience of 2 to 4 years. Also, we are open for security consultant source code review and GRC consultants. The experience ranges 2 to 4 years. You can refer, you can apply or you can refer to any of your colleagues who are looking out for change. And if you think that these positions and the experience range is matching, you can refer to them. We have our job post on the LinkedIn site available. You can apply from there or you can apply from the career page. Thank you. Thank you for joining the webinar. This is all about the hirings that we are doing currently. Over to you, Aparna. Thank you, team.
Thank you, Akanksha. So, today, Pugal, our associate security researcher, will be answering your questions on the topic of analyzing and reversing firmware. Before I hand it over to him, there are a few housekeeping tips that you need to follow. Please remain on mute. If you have a question, type it in the chat box. Google will address all your questions one by one. Without further ado, let's get started. Google, over to you.
Okay, I'm welcoming everyone here for the Ask the Expert session. Today, I'll be addressing the questions regarding topic analyzing and reversing the firmwares. So about the speaker, myself, I'm V. Pugal Selvan, Associate Security Researcher from IoT, Payatu team. And I work as a security consultant by day and then hardware hacker by night. So basically, out of interest, I'm learning about hardware also. So my primary domain is firmware and my secondary one is hardware. So I'm just learning into hardware out of curiosity, and I like to break and build stuff. So I just like to write my own code, break it, debug it, and then intentionally write some vulnerable codes and then learn about all different types of bug classes and everything, and likes to reverse engineer a lot. So as you guys have already, shooted a lot of questions. So I have just grouped them one by one because so many questions are basically, repetitions. Okay, when it comes to firmware, lot of people have asked like, where do I start and all these things. So those questions have been grouped together. So here you can see certain questions have been grouped together. So I don't want to put a different, different slides for the same answers. So yeah, we'll get started. So here we have two questions. How to start firmware reversing without any background knowledge? How can I master the firmware analysis and reversing? So when it comes to analyzing and reverse engineering, it cannot be done without any background knowledge because one has to know a lot of internals. One will be encountering questions like what is happening, how it is happening. So these kind of questions arise. So it's very hard to understand the process of something without any background knowledge. So when it comes to firmware, the prerequisites required are C programming and assembly language, because the dump which will be extracted from the device, which the firmware which we will be getting, those will be loaded into like tools like disassembler, decompilers. So to understand the functionality of the code, one has to be proficient in going through it. So that's why C programming and assembly languages are much needed one as a prerequisite. And in assembly, most preferably ARM, because most of the devices use ARM, are running on ARM architecture in the embedded in an IoT domain. And final most thing, you need a lot of patience, because understanding all this analyzing and reverse engineering a process is very hard. It can't be done in single day, so it requires a lot of time and efforts. And then tools which are useful for analyzing and reverse engineering firmwares are like debuggers like GDB, disassemblers and decompilers like Ghidra, IDA. And final most thing is Binwalk. Binwalk is a tool which helps to identify the file signature present inside a dump, and it might throw a lot of false positive as it is just checking for a file signature in a dump. So it's our duty to like clear off all the stuff. And third thing is like one will be needing a lot of Linux internals, because in the full system firmwares, mostly they have used Linux, and it is good if we start with Linux internals and then know the working of it. And final most thing is like whatever it is, let's say Linux, a full system based or a bare metal based or a RTOS based. For bare metal and RTOS based, one can procure an STM32 microcontroller development board, and they can start like programming. They can build their own stuff, and then they extract it from that development board, which is very easy in the development board. So one can like build their own stuff, and they can extract, and then they can break stuff, dissect it, and then analyze and reverse engineer that. And for the full system, the most easiest thing is the routers. So you can just get the router firmware through the website, and then you can run Binwalk, extract the file system, and then analyze the entire file system, go through it. And the second one is like how to analyze the real-time bare metal firmware, such as basically as mentioned, the binary files such as hex, raw binary files. So the bare metal is something which I already said, a specific program, just one specific program running on top of the metal, the microcontroller. So if you want to reverse engineer that, so whatever has been extracted in the initial stage, it looks like scary, hexadecimal values. So because if we take any known file format like ELF is like something an executable in Linux, which is you can see those ELF file in the full system firmware when you extract the file system, but it doesn't have any proper entry point, any structuredized way, so it looks scary. But so the first step here it is knowing the unknowns. So initially it will be a scary looking binary blob, and we have to make it to a structured friendly binary blob. So that how do we make it friendly? It just look what controller it is, what architecture it is running on, and then looking at the architecture technical reference manuals and everything. It has written everything. So basically it says once when the power is given to the controller, from where it has to start. So from there we can get the entry point. So all these things can be can be known from the manuals and everything, the documentation. So from there, we can make this scary looking binary blob into a structured friendly one. So from there we can start our analysis. So these bytes, basically they are just nothing but machine codes and data. So we have to map them, and then we need help of some disassemblers and decompilers, so that it gets like converted back to somewhat readable form. Let's say Ghidra, if you just load all these things, the machine code and everything, we have to slowly start resolving stuff in Ghidra. Initially it won't be in an identifiable stage, because whatever is there in the full if it's an ELF file format, the memory addresses, everything has been mapped. As I said, bare metal is just running on top of the physical controller. So we have to map it. So we have to find the base address. We have to give the right configuration to the Ghidra tool, like what kind of architecture it is, ARM, Cortex and everything. And we have to map it and start with our analysis. And then for analysis, sometimes, you will be having some objective. Maybe you would have run some strings command on that extracted firmware. You might be seeing some interesting strings. It might be printing out serially through interfaces like UART. So maybe, you can find which function is doing that, because in Git tools like Gitradar, you can search for strings and some useful memory addresses. So you can directly jump there instead of starting from the, if you're no, don't want to burn some time into getting into the entry point and everything, you can directly jump there. And the final most thing is unveil the unseen. So this bare metal binary, it's completely a stripped one. It doesn't have any symbols. Like if you load it in Git, it won't be saying that this is the main function and this is like the serial print function. No, it won't be saying anything. So what we can do is like we can take the SDKs which have been used for developing these firmwares, and we can write some sample programs, and those sample programs will be compiled, and we can match the the function signature, the bytes. Let's take printf for example. If printf will be having certain function signatures, like it will be starting with these, it will be having these bytes. If the bytes for that particular function is matching the bytes which we are looking into, if it's present in the firmware. Let's say if we are identified a function in Gitra and we want to rename it, we want to resolve it so that it becomes easy for us to reverse engineer it, we can do this method. So this is how it is for the bare metal firmware. And what things we should look into firmware, like the next question, what are the things we should look into the firmware, like any binaries, any specific? So yeah, mostly what we look for is like the hard-coded sensitive information or data. And if it's an binary, let's say if we're able to get any binary, we'll be looking at these things like any memory corruption, because most of them are written in memory corruption vulnerable language like C, C++ languages. And is there any implementation vulnerabilities? So yeah, I've mentioned mostly everything the same for the bare metal and RTOS base and the full system. But when it comes to the full system is something, okay, just give me a second. So full system is, as I said earlier, it is not just a direct binary which is running on top of the microcontroller. Here, it has it is basically running with the help of the operating system. So the kernel is there, the file system is there. So it usually starts the moment when you power on the full system devices. So it starts with the initial boot ROM code. So let's say it's the boot ROM is I'm naming it as BR. That's the initial code it starts with, and then from there it goes to like the bootloaders. Bootloaders, it can be customly implemented by any vendors or something like that, or you can use any open source bootloaders out there in the internet. And bootloaders can be many stages. So basically, one simple program loading a complex program, it just keeps loading like that, and finally the complex program loads the final most thing called kernel. So from there, when it reaches to the kernel, now the kernel looks for the file system. Now it looks for the file system. The file system will be containing all the, the binaries, the text files, whatever configuration file basically are. If you have seen the directory structure of the Linux or any other, we all have been familiar with the directories and files. So it is the one which mounts the file system. And from there, it looks out what and all things to be. Now it has to start all the binaries and everything. So where does it find all these binaries? So that's the question. So if you take Linux, so you can see that, let me clear the screen before that. Yeah. So once when you extract the file system from the full system firmware, we can just go to that etc directory of that extracted file system. And inside that, there is a directory called init.d, and it consists of all the startup scripts, which will be starting of all the binaries and the necessary what every startup scripts will be there. And we can read those startup scripts, and then we can say which binaries are getting called, And from there, we can just find the location of the binaries from the startup script, and then we can particularly target those binaries, and we can load it in Ghidra, and then we can reverse engineer it, and we can look for any interesting things, any hard coded stuff. Yeah. So it applies to all the three. Actually, the first point applies to all the three, but for the full system, it's a bit different. But for bare metal and RTOS, you need to like uh, before start reversing it, you need to find all the necessary details, like what controller is that, and you need to get the documentation manuals, and we need to find the base address where the thing should be mapped, and then only we can start with the analysis. The next question we have here is how one can dump the firmware of a particular device, let's say a router. How can one emulate it if the device is not present physically? Okay, so the extraction can be done in multiple ways. It depends upon the device, and also if you have analyzed it properly, we can come up with the easiest way to extract it also. So let's say in the case of a microcontroller based device, where the device is not like a big complex device, and then it is using microcontrollers, if it looks like a simple device, just look out for the debug ports like the JTAG or SWD. So through that, one can extract the firmware of a bare metal, from the microcontroller, and mostly it will be it's a bare metal application. And then for RTOS, there might be an external chip, and it actually completely depends upon the functionality. Sometimes the firmware size will not like fit into the internal flash of the controller, and the vendor will be like planning to implement it in an put it in an external chip. In that case, one has to like desolder the chip, and then using the suitable reader, one has to desolder a chip and read it. So the same thing goes for the full system also. Let's say in the question it has been, let's say the device is a router. So in case of a router, mostly whatever I've encountered was there will be an external flash chip, and then because the firmware cannot be put into the internal memory offered by that SoC or an controller, so one has to go for, and the vendor has to go for the external flash memory. So yeah, we have to desolder it, and then using a suitable reader, we can dump the firmware, and then we can start with the analysis. And this is one of the and there is one more case where we can get the firmware dump through the bootloader. So the bootloader, at certain times, certain bootloaders, they can be interrupted in between using some keystrokes. You connect to the device serially, and then using some combination of keystrokes, it can be interrupted, and then we can land into a bootloader. And the bootloader, if the bootloader is offering us some kind of shell, we will look out for what kind of commands are there in the bootloader shell, and if it is offering anything like memory read, memory write, we can just read out the contents, and then from there we can write an serial script using Python, and then we can extract it. We can dump the bytes from the memory through that. The most commonly encountered one is U-boot. The U-boot offers memory read, memory write commands. So yeah, not only that, there might be some custom implemented bootloader also if they're offering that feature, and that can be used to extract the firmware. And for the emulation part, if you don't have the device physically with us, we can use softwares like software frameworks like Unicorn, and then Qemu, where Qemu is a famous one. We can do a full system emulation also, or if you want to emulate a user land binary of a different architecture in which your host PC is not supporting, you can use Qemu. So in that way, one can analyze it. And again, another question on firmware emulation. But here the question is, how do you use firmware emulation for reverse engineering? So as I said, Qemu, Unicorn, Qemu is like complete full system, and Unicorn is for like the bare metal applications. So here I have mentioned GDB. It's a debugger actually, and there is another version of GDB called multi-arch, which supports like multiple architectures. So let's say our systems are basically running in Intel architecture, but the firmware which we have extracted is a full system firmware, and it's an it's running on ARM architecture. We can emulate that binary. Let's say we are specifically interested in one binary after extracting the file system. We can emulate it with QEMU, and this binary can be hooked up to the debugger. So basically the debugger here is the GDB. It opens a port for debugging facility, so the GDB can hooked up, and we can step into instructions one by one. By instructions, I mean the the mission codes one by one, and we can inspect the register states and where it is like branching to, and is there any vulnerabilities, or is there whatever is happening, we can do a performer analysis. And the next question we have here is, what is the roadmap for reverse engineering slash hardware pen testing? Where to start and how it should be moved further? So for the entire device, let's say for the firmware part, firmware analysis and reverse engineering, one has to be like one has to know the Linux internals, build process of bare metal firmwares, C programming, assembly language, and then the booting process, like how the final application program gets executed. So what is the boot flow? So we have to know it in a we have to know that process too. And for the hardware part, it is always better to take the hardware, tear it down, and then start reconning the PCB. After tearing down, pull out the PCB and then start reconning it. On reconning, just identify what are the components which are there in the PCB. Just go for the components like microcontroller, memory chips, and then other integrated circuit. But most of the integrated circuits, don't waste time on the useless components like the resistor and the capacitors and everything while reconning. Just look out for the main things like the microcontroller, memory chip. But we can't term it like the resistors and the capacitor will be a useless one. But as of the initial stage, the initial reconning, they are like not much concerning. But when are you performing any hardware kind of attacks, they might come into the picture. So there is a possibility. But for the reconning part, it is better to ignore those things and then look out for the controllers, memory chip, and other interesting ICs present on the board. And after getting their vendor names and then the part number, start looking for those in the internet and try to pull out the data sheets and then the reference manual, and other documentation of the ICs, and then get an understanding of like what they are doing on the PCB, like why it is like present. We can do a comparative study, like first understand the working of the device from an user perspective, from an end user perspective, and then do the tear down, and then after reconning, identifying these controllers, try to like deduce a logic, like why this component is present there, and like what could it do and what it could hold. So these kind of things. And then look out for the pins, the test pads on the PCB, and then look out for find out the ports for like the UART, SPI, I2C, and the JTAG, and then solder wires, and then analyze these protocols, whether what it is like sending, and then what it is doing here, and then so it is better to learn these protocols, the hardware protocols, to get a good understanding of it. Moving on to the next question. Since there are less job openings for hardware pen testing in India, what can make the individual to get into this field in India? Any certification, any other competitive platforms to showcase skills? So as I'm aware of, like there are much about the hardware side, So better thing is like you get your hands dirty with the hardware by breaking it down and then taking out the PCB and inspecting what I already said in the previous questions. So yeah, tear down the device and do it yourself. And also we have our in-house courses in Exploit Academy. So you can check out the hardware hacking courses on that in our Expert Academy. And use Google manuals and documentation manuals of the controllers, and then whatever ICs have been used. So those are your friends. And also reach out and do follow the hardware experts. Like it may be in LinkedIn, Twitter, just keep on following them, or you can ping them and then you can have a good conversation about that. That will be helpful. And how do you do fuzzing? And it's all about like subjecting the software with a large amount of unexpected malform or random input data, input data, and we'll be subjecting that binary with some input. If it's creating any crashes or like some memory leaks, some unhandled exceptions, which will be useful to find any security vulnerabilities. And as far I know, the AFL, American Fuzzy Loop, is a software tool which is being used for fuzzing. And for more details in that, there is a guy called Antonio Morales. So in his GitHub page, he has mentioned about this fuzzing 101, where he takes Adobe Reader and then a lot of other real life stuff, and he fuzzes it, and he has written all the steps in an beautiful in a README document. So you can just read it and start replicating, and you can start doing it. And for the latest automated tools, which can be used for analyzing firmware, to analyze firmware. So for the automated tools, instead of manually doing the tools running the tools one by one, let's say bin walk, and then finding which files signatures are present in this file, and then extracting themselves, you can fasten up the process. If you know the fundamentals, you can fasten up the process. So rather than burning a lot of time. So there are things like the firmware mod kit. The firmware mod kit is basically packing and unpacking. Packing and unpacking, basically like you will be cutting off the images from the firmware block. Let's say if you want the file system, you can find the files. If you find the signature of the file system, you can extract it manually by using the dd command in Linux. But if you use automated tools like firmware modkit, the binary and dd, everything, it performs by itself, the packing and unpacking. So automatically the firmware modkit itself, it will remove, extract the images, and it mounts the file system, and you can traverse into the file system, and then you can start with your analysis. And it also offers like modifying the firmwares, not only like packing, unpacking it. You can modify certain files, and then you can unpack it, so that now we have the modified malicious firmware which can be flashed into the devices. So the firmware modkit is used for packing, unpacking, and modifying it. And firmware is for, again, extraction. So whatever is there in the firmware blob, the binary blob, you can extract the contents, as I mentioned in the firmware modkit. And it can do emulation and dynamic analysis. So basically, it's, if you don't have the physical device, the emulation, it offers emulation, and from the emulation we can start performing the dynamic analysis. So it starts the GDB server, and you can hook up to the GDB server, and you can step into the instructions one by one. So you can do all this stuff with it, rather than doing running bin walk and Chemo on your own, and then wasting your time on searching for what flags to be added to the Chemo, because that learning about Chemo itself will takes a lot of time. So you can use Firmware. And recent days, I observed that Binary Ninja is like offering auto detection for architecture and access with the base address. So when you load the bare metal binary into the Binary Ninja, so it finds the what architecture it is. So auto detection is there, which will be helpful if you don't know what kind of architecture it is. You have no idea about it. You just have the access. Maybe that can be used. And for starting with the analysis, we need to map the firmware into specific offset, the right base address. Otherwise, the string, let's say the data won't be referenced properly. Let's say there is a string called hello world, and it has its own address, which it has been mapped to a certain address. If you want to reference that properly, however it is being seated in the memory, same memory addresses should be there. So you need to find the right base address where it should be placed. So yeah, it assists with that. So they have written it in such a way that it assists with the detection of architecture and also the base address. And in Ghidra, once when you have there is something called SVD loader. So this is a Python script. So you can run this. There's an option called run your own script in Ghidra. So there is already called a script called SVD loader. So it maps out the peripheral addresses rather than looking into some, scary looking hexadecimal addresses. If you do that, it will be mapping out and saying out what peripheral it is, whether it is UART, whether this address is for UART, whether this address is for any general purpose IO, something like that. So it just maps out things. And yeah, sometimes you can write your own tool to automate things depending upon the scenario you're getting hit upon. So depends upon that. The question we have here is where to start ECU firmware hacking. The firmwares are mostly RTOS and bare metal based, but it is not always the case because depending upon which subsystem it is present and its complexity of its functionalities, it can be a full system firmware, and internally it will be doing complex things for the full system side if it is being a part of of a subsystem which requires that much of functionalities, complex functionalities. So for a start, it is good to learn about bare metal and RTOS based firmwares by identifying the controllers and gathering information through its datasheet and reference manual. So when that process is done, then using the tools mentioned before, so one can find the base address to load the firmware in, and then they can jump into the analysis and reverse engineering stage. And one more tip, it is also good to know about the compliances like AUTOSAR, as they have described the specification of the software architecture for the ECUs. So knowing about these compliances will help in our analysis process for a better understanding, for a good reverse engineering effort. And these are the collection of questions which were there in, related to the encryption part of the firmware. So there are 4 questions regarding this thing: how to tackle the unpacking of the firmware and then encrypted firmware. And second one is like how to decrypt an encrypted firmware and how to analyze an encrypted firmware. And the last one is like how to figure out where the firmware is encrypted, whether the firmware is encrypted or not. Are there any other methods apart from the entropy method? So breaking the encryption is like pretty hard, I would say, but it will take some time once when you get done a proper inspection and reconning. If the keys used for decrypting have been secured insecurely, and if we get hold of like those keys, then we can easily decrypt it. So that's a thing. But for that, we need to understand the complete working and then understanding. So you need to do internal reverse engineering for that from the hardware side also. And getting not now you have the keys, but you need to know what kind of decryption routine, how the function is like. There should be a function which should be decrypting it. So the keys as well as the decryption routine. So these things should be there. So that in one of the blogs, what I have encountered was, so in the firmware, in the previous version was, let's say version 1.1 is not encrypted, and they are planning to implement encryption in version 1.2. They have accidentally, not accidentally, as a transition, they have placed the decryption keys and then the routine and everything inside the older version of firmware, the 1.1, and it was there. So that binary was there. So everything has been there. So by analyzing the previous version, one was able to get the insecure storage of keys, and then what kind of decryption routine, the function it is performing to decrypt the firmware. He was able to get that, and he reverse engineered that. And in the successive versions, let's say the 1.2, it has been decrypted. Now the one who has reverse engineered it can, like, decrypt the firmware. And this one takes a lot of time, but there is a possibility that, sometimes a code which runs before the application, where the application code will be completely encrypted. Let's say the bootloader is decrypting, has a stub for decrypting the application. So that application will be stored in a secured, with some good hardware configuration, it will be secured, stored securely. So to break out those kind of security implementations, you can use fault injection, but it's kind of advanced and it takes some time, and there are many parameters for that. And another thing is like side channel attacks. So they just analyze the power being consumed by the device, and from that they try to extract the keys. So that is one way, but these two things are a bit advanced. But these are the ways which people have used, and then they have done they have broke the encryption. And sometimes, what if they have implemented a poorly custom encryption? Let's say some XOR or something. Mostly people won't be doing that, but what if the implementation is like poor? Because it's better to use the default, crypto libraries, something like that, to perform these things, rather than implementing a poor math, and then so that people will be easily able to defeat it if it's not being done properly, because it requires a lot of stuff. So, and for the last question, it was mostly asking like how to figure out whether it's encrypted or not, and any other methods rather than entropy. The only thing in which we can say whether the firmware is encrypted or not is by looking at the bytes. So the randomness of the bytes is what determines it. So that's what the entropy means. So sometimes there might be this clash, because entropy will be high not only because of the encryption. There is something called compression, because certain images will be compressed due to some memory constraint while storing in the chips, because these devices are not something like your general purpose computers. They have they consume very less power, and they have like very less memory storage size. So they have to compress stuff and then place it over in the memory. So yeah, there will be some confusion. So mostly people have been using entropy, and sometimes if you have that binary, you can run the normal strings command, and if you feel that the strings are a little bit malformed and not looking in a readable format, from that also you can find that, okay, encryption might be there along with the entropy. So along with the entropy, this goes hand in hand, becomes very, helps you to come to a conclusion that this will be encrypted. And another question is like, in most of the CTFs category, more like reverse engineering, miscellaneous exploitation in web application and kernel, and challenges in boot to root, steganography, forensics, etc. So only few CTFs for has hardware categories. How can I practice that? Finally, I'm very curious that you have started this career and share resources that you have used. So yeah, I do agree that hardware has very little challenges in CTFs, but I have heard that many on-site CTFs were being conducted for embedded security. So for that, you can try Paya2 CTF. Paya2 have previously have conducted a hiring CTF, and check Hack the Box CTF, because in the last Hack the Box CTF, they were conducting the cyber apocalypse CTF, which HTB was conducting Hack the Box. They had the hardware category also, but that was completely being done from the, you won't be doing it in you won't be getting the physical device. It was completely done on the emulated one. So they have emulated and then they have made the challenges. But just keep looking for the on-site CTFs. So you can check CTF time website. So they have they every CTF whichever they're gonna organize, they'll be posting all the events and the time it is getting started and everything. And you can check out the description, and they have posted the link and everything. And also you can follow in LinkedIn and Twitter, because all the events won't be like getting registered in the CTF time. You can be seeing some small CTF, on-site CTF. Even they might be having hardware-based challenges. But mostly for hardware, there are resources in, yeah, you can read blogs. Actually, I have attached a lot of resources in the slides. The slides will be shared to you guys after the session. You can go through the stuff. So better thing is like get yourself a hardware like a router or any other small devices, get a microcontroller, program it, and understand the hardware side. So that will be good. And yeah, the final most question is like the resources and the platform that provide firmware hacking. So I have mentioned all the resources in the resource session. So moving on to the resource session, yeah, we have the Payatu blogs. So complete whatever we perform here in IoT, everything has been properly structured and the blogs have been there. You can check out the blogs, and our in-house courses are there. So you can visit Exploit the Academy courses, complete IoT related, the firmware side or hardware side, everything you can check it out. And YouTube channels are there, like Stack Smashing, Matt Brown, Joe Grand, and Live Overflow. You can check them out for hardware and reverse engineering side and exploitation part of that. And for a proper guided full system Linux based firmware, you can check out the most famous and the commonly starting point for most of them. It's like the DVRF firmware, the damn vulnerable router firmware. I've attached a link. The slides will be shared to you guys later, so you can check it out. And for reverse engineering the bare metal firmware, yeah, so I have attached the blogs and everything. And for learning the Linux internals, so get a good grip of the Linux system programming. Through C, you will be writing programs and debugging it, and then seeing all the internals of the Linux. So yeah, it's better to do Linux system programming. And recently I've encountered this one. This made me really, excited and got into hardware hacking side, because I'm learning this book. I would suggest that the hardware hacking handbook, this book is really nice. So you can check this out. And for exploitation and reversing part, and then some internals of the Linux, you can check the all-time famous and then the most used one, Hacking the Art of Exploitation by John Erickson. And for CTFs, as I already mentioned, you can just check it in CTF time for any upcoming CTFs. And the last two more things is like for bare metal, the forward engineering and the reverse engineering process, it has been beautifully said in the Embedded System Security and Trust Zone ebook. So do check this out. And for the entire IoT hacking handbook, it is there in our Exploity website. So yeah, you can also check it out. So we are almost coming to the end of the session. So we'll be looking into the live questions now. So either, just a minute. Aparna, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay, for the questions, they can't mute themselves, unmute themselves, right?
Right. So for the questions, there are a few questions already people have mentioned in the chat box portal. I'll request you to just go through them one by one. And for the participants, if you have any questions that you want to ask our banded Google, I request you all to put up your questions in the chat box.
Okay, so they can go ahead with it in the chat box itself.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me address the questions one by one. Just give me a minute. So in the chat box, the first one is like asked by Rohan Shah, that does bare metal firmware has a file system? No, the bare metal doesn't have a file system actually. It is just a single program which is being run directly on the microcontroller. So it won't be having a file system because it doesn't have the capacity to, like, find out the file system and then mount it, and doesn't have that much enough space. So these microcontroller based things will be mostly running the bare metal firmwares. So the power and the memory constraint, and they don't have that much power to do that. So the bare metal doesn't have the file system, only the full system base, and sometimes RTOS. So only RTOS and the full system will be having this file system. Yeah, they have the file system. So when are we, next question by Sushant Mane. So when we are analyzing these binaries and reversing them, I do find memory corruption happening, but how to trigger it, like how to backtrack it, example from where to trigger it, web app, protocol, etc. So we have found the memory corruption. So uh, if it's user controllable, maybe you can emulate that binaries, or if you have access into that device, or if you can, let's say if it's a bare metal one and it is having a memory corruption vulnerability, it will be easy if if the device has any debugging ports like JTAG or SWD. You can connect them, and using tools like OpenOCD. And OpenOCD, it opens a GDB port where you can step into instructions one by one. You can hold the machine and you can step into the instructions one by one, and you can check it out. So that's a way. Or if you don't have any access to the device, I mean, if you don't have any access to that device environment, then it's better if you're able to extract the binary, and then it will be good if you emulate it in your system, and then do it locally and try to trigger it, because in a local system you'll be having a lot of access. The tools which I mentioned for the emulation will be having a lot of access. So from there you can check whether you're able to trigger the memory corruption or not. And another question is like how to identify whether the by Shrabanan, how to identify the whether the firmware file is bare metal or not, and how to figure out the base address of the bare metal firmware which needs to be reverse engineering. Okay, so for bare metal, you can run binwalk on it, and if you're sometimes you binwalk will it's just a tool which identifies the file signatures, and depending upon the signatures it will be saying that these files have been, this content have been present in the binary blob. So you can use binwalk for that, but binwalk, it kind of gives false positive at times. It won't be like accurate because it is just a tool which looks into the binary and files, checks whether if this signature is there, then it will be this file. It is a file system. It is an some zip file is present. So it just gives out some false positive also. So, but sometimes depending upon the device's functionality also, we can try to figure it out. Let's say if you're able to get access to the hardware, and if you're able to find some controller is being used, and we can say what architecture is that. If it's ARM has like 3 profiles, like microcontroller profile, or real-time profile and application profile. So microcontroller has very low computational power, and RTOS is somewhat pretty, used for all real-time purposes. It has better one. So yeah, not only the firmware which is being on which it is being run. So from there also we can get the information, and we can come to a conclusion where to which type of firmware is that, whether it's an microcontroller based or like and complete application based, where it is running on a full system firmware which is using Linux. So from that you can do that. And for the bare metal, the base address, so the base address, once when you're extracting it, so the base address can be found in the manuals of the controller, and it will be having the memory mapping and everything. From there, you can get the memory addresses. Let's say the most popular controller is like ST microcontrollers. So they have, if you take, let's say if they're using any microcontroller, so download the respective model number, by looking into the part number, download the respective model number data sheet, and look into the memory mapping, and it has showed all the memory mapping, like where the flash memory should be, where the SRAM, the internal flash memory, the RAM, and then the peripherals, everything have been mapped. So from there we can get the flash memory address, the base address and everything, and we can map over there. And next question is by Azim. Is there any way to find memory corruption vulnerabilities in embedded firmware without access to the source code? Yeah, I mean, once when you get access of the binary, and if you're able to make sense of that binary, like whether what kind of binary is a bare metal or full system, and from there you can start your analysis, because these things are existed earlier, they existed as a source code, and in the forward engineering process it has been converted into the assembly level language and then broken down to the machine codes, that is the binary values. So there are tools like Ghidra, IDA, and these they offer the disassembly and decompiler. So these works on the principle, like let's say we have used this certain source code that will be giving off some certain machine codes, and now we have this machine codes, the binary value of the machine code. So these tools will be looking into the machine codes, and they'll be doing the now the reverse process for you guys. So it will be giving off. So now have these machine codes, just so then what would have been the source code, so it will be giving you source code. So that's why we use Ghidra, IDA, and everything. And from there you can get a then it becomes easy for you guys, because you can't make sense of the binary values. And you, even though if you're good with assembly, if the code base is like too long, you can't it will be having too much instructions, and it will be branching to different code parts, and it's very hard to make sense of it and follow it. So yeah, you can use tools like Ghidra and IDA, and then you will be getting a good decompiled view. 90% you will be able to, it will be in a good readable form. Basically it will be in the C code, and you can read from there. And going to the next question again by Sushant Mane. As far my experience, once we get the binary, we can find the target binary inside it, like some web server or protocol binary, putting it put it in Ghidra or IDA, get the pseudocode or assembly. Statically we can analyze for bugs. Okay, sorry, this was not a question. He was repeating the same thing. Uh, Thanks for helping him out, Shushant. Okay. So next question again by Shravan, and again, this is based on is entropy based on due to the randomness and due to obfuscation. Uh, okay. So it basically entropy denotes the randomness. So whatever it is causing the randomness, as I already mentioned, it can be encryption, or it can be even that, as I said, these devices are not like a general purpose computers. They require low power and they have like run on low power and low memory spaces. So things will be, the images, the kernel, whatever, they won't be just existing as it is in the memory. They will be compressed. So these compression also causes the randomness. So it's hard to say that which causes it. So it can be multiple things. So yeah, detailed analysis. So we can run strings, and then you can see whether this, so sometimes certain parts won't be encrypted or compressed. So we can use the strings also and observe the strings. That will also be a good way of saying that. Okay. How to emulate NVRAM manually without NVRAM Faker project. Okay. Okay. This one I haven't heard about it actually. I haven't so I have no idea about this NVRAM side. So moving to the this question ESP32, sorry, CSP32 or ESP826 is a bare metal because they have a small memory and only on RTOS. Yeah, I mean, even in that ESP32, it usually has a very less memory actually, but in that thing there are many configurations. There mean 32 KB flash size or like 64 KB, 128 in the same model itself. There are like specifications, so sizes are there. uh, Mostly ESP32, what I have seen, it runs on RTOS because it has very rich peripherals. It supports all Wi-Fi protocols and the Bluetooth and everything. So mostly it's good to run it on RTOS. Bare metal, it will be bit tedious. But ESP32, they have their own IoT, the development software kit. So they are using the free RTOS, I guess, and they're just using from the free RTOS, they're just using their own wrapper on top of that and doing this stuff. So yeah.
Um,
uh,
Guys,
and
there are just 2 minutes left for the session to end. Whatever your questions are for Pugal, you can post it in the chat box. He'll address it one by one. Post 2 minutes, the session will end. Yeah, Pugal, please continue.
okay. And again, by Shravan, please consider black box where we don't have any information on the firmware. Okay. Uh, any information on the firmware, you will be starting from uh, the higher stage, and you need to maybe what I would do is like look out for some any strings, some embedded strings in that. Try to get if the firmware is saying sometimes the model number or anything like that, because in the it has to print those booting logs. So it will be those things will be embedded in there. So it will be containing some model number or anything like that. Some embedded string. From there you can get some clues, or better thing is like open the device on which the firmware is like running, and then look what are the hardware stuffs which are present on that. And from there you can try to understand, okay, what and all components are along the main controller and how many controllers are like present. And from there you can boil down stuff, and then you can get some idea from there. Because directly looking at the firmware without any idea will be very bad. So these firmware will be definitely running in some kind of device, so on the controller or some SoC. So it's better to inspect the PCB and start to reverse engineering the stuff, like uh, reverse engineer the PCB to which components the main controller is being connected to, what are the other the peripherals, external peripherals. And yeah, from there we can do that. And later we'll be having some good idea about the firmware, because we know on which controller or SoC it's running on. We can look out for any popularly, the most commonly used SDKs, the software development kit used for the firmware. And maybe we from there we can slowly, the black box stuff, one by one we can just keep on finding the answers about, and somewhat make it to a white box, but it will take some time. Yeah, our firmware is openly available for download. Yeah, you can check it from the vendor side. For routers, you can check it from, let's say for a router, is there sometimes the vendor they have it in their website, so you can get it from there also. So yeah, you can download it from there. Or you can if it is not accessible from the website, then you can go with a manual extraction from the device. So I guess these are the questions. Yeah, Parna, I guess I'm done. These are the questions. And thanks a lot, guys. It's been nice handling this session with you guys, and the questions were really amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you guys for such being wonderful participants. Thank you, Pugal, for helping out participants with their questions regarding the topic. So let's end the session. Happy weekend to everyone, and thank you once again for being such wonderful participants. And thank you, Pugal, for being such a nice, like addressing all those questions. Thank you.
Thank you.